All right, the lady says it's recording. Here we are on The Blind Man in Black. I'm Brian Snyder. Thank you so much for watching on YouTube and listening on Apple Podcast. If you like the show, please rate, subscribe, and review. And if you like my wife and I being exhausting, please go to the Exhausting Snyders on TikTok. And I'm really excited because the guest that we are about to listen to, we have not spoken in 20 years, and she was my speech teacher at CalArts, and I'm deeply honored to have you here, Claudia Anderson, who is also a professor, and we're going to learn a lot more. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Brian.
So how have you been holding together through the pandemic?
Well, I retired 2 years ago.
Okay.
Which I say I dodged a bullet.
Really?
Because I was retired for 8 months, and it was a wonderful retirement because DePaul was giving retirement incentives, which is the reason why I retired when I did.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was 8 months into it, feeling my footing. What was I going to do with my time? How I was, what I wanted to do in this next phase.
Mm-hmm.
And then the pandemic hit, and all of my colleagues at DePaul and everywhere all over the country started teaching voice and speech on Zoom. And I thought, wow, I am very compassionate about their journey. I'm glad I'm not on it.
Yeah.
I thought about them a lot. And of course, every once in a while, I would see a production of some of my former students on a Zoom platform. And I would feel for them, because I think, oh my God, there they are getting their MFAs and their BFAs, and they're not able to be on stage and interacting with each other and in a voice and speech class where they're releasing their voices. Instead, they're home looking at screens. I just think they made do. They learned things that they might not have learned about digital communication, but to not be in the sacred theater space for all that time when you're a student, and I can't even imagine it. So I felt for them, but I was really glad that I wasn't doing it.
Yeah, especially the work that you do. And I remember, when I was in your class in 1998, I remember, you had the IPA, the International Phonetic Alphabet pillows, and we had to share them. And they were so wonderful because they really were a tactile way of embracing those sounds. And I would imagine that it would be so difficult to do anything like that over Zoom that would compare.
You couldn't. So how do you teach voice and speech over Zoom? What you end up doing is watching students in little squares, trying to have an interaction among students and between student and teacher that feels like the student can be in his or her own environment and release. But there are students who are in an open environment where they can release, and there are students who are home with their parents, right? Or there are students who are in an apartment where they can't make any noise.
Yeah.
And so I imagine from talking to my colleagues that voice and speech training became more about personal projects. So each person would sort of design a project around dialects or around their own accent, or around a text project that would allow them to make some progress, and then they would self-assess. There was a lot of leeway for student input about how it was all going, but none of that. As you remember, the voice and speech training in a conservatory is all about the ensemble, right? It's all about give and take. It's all about feeling vibrations on your body, and what those pillows do is to, they're huggable, and you can rub them all over your place and all over yourself, and you can imagine that you're using the pillow to evoke sounds out of your body. In a very tactile way. So the kinesthetic sense that's so important to our work, and the ensemble sense is so important to our work, would have just not been there.
I miss those pillows, I have to say. I think about them often because I was like, man, they were such a useful tool in dialects and so on. It's really, I think
And we
about that.
really in 1998, we had only been using the pillows for maybe 6 or 7 years.
Hmm.
Louis Colaianni came up with the idea of the pillows. He and I both were teaching at Shakespeare and Company together, and
Hmm.
we were always trying to solve this problem about the transition between voice training, the Linklater work, and speech training, which at that time was all about copying the sounds of the teacher and learning a prescribed sort of standard American accent. And CalArts decided that they were on the journey of connecting Linklater with the more free speech training, and I had already been doing that a few years with Louis. So I brought the pillows to CalArts.
Hmm.
And Louis and I wrote a book called The Joy of, or he wrote Joy of Phonetics, and then he and I wrote Bringing Speech to Life, which took the pillows work onto a workbook. Remember the workbook?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, that was very, very valuable tools, and I deeply appreciated it. So let's go back a little bit. Let's talk about your how everything began. Where are you from? And
I was born right outside of Chicago, lived
mhm,
here for 5 years, moved to Michigan, spent my little childhood in Michigan, moved to Ohio, spent my high school years in Ohio, went to Miami University in Ohio,
mhm.
started teaching music. I majored in music. So I taught choral singing. Um,
So let me ask you this. I'm assuming you had an accent at one point, right? That Michigan kind of Illinois.
Ohio-ish, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, yes. When you're a voice and speech teacher and you're listening to people all the time, and you're listening to and you're I was never on the road of let's eliminate everybody's regionalisms.
Hmm.
So I always had this sort of sense that I didn't want to impinge on my students' uh, earned accent, but I also wanted them to feel as free to explore other sounds and other dialects as possible. So there was this kind of tightrope we were on between don't tell a student that their accent is bad, wrong, incorrect. Encourage their personal accent, but also allow them to compare their accent with other people in the class accent and
Hmm.
dialects and all of that. While I did that, though, I became really uh, cognizant of my own accent, which was my accent was sort of flat-ish,
Hmm.
Ohio. I would call my mother mom. Yeah, I'm not going. I'm
Hmm.
not going. I had uh, a lot of chewing going on in my mouth when I was in grad school. One of my teachers, I said to my teacher, I don't have an accent.
Hmm.
And the students in the class said, "Oh, really, Claudia? Can you chew your R's any harder?" So,
Wow.
so simultaneously to learning and accepting all accents, I also inevitably altered my own. And the other thing, though, Brian, is that when you're in singing, um, you're thinking about your vowel and your tone all the time,
Hmm.
right? So I think that the first thing that altered my own accent was just singing in a choir where we all were trying to sound the same. Oh, come all ye, right? So we were all
Hmm.
singing the same vowel at the same time, which sort of sensitizes you.
Hmm.
Sounds. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, yeah.
That's how it all began. Yeah.
So, were your parents musicians, or how did you? What did they do?
My dad was an engineer, wannabe musician.
Okay.
My mom was a housewife, secretary, wannabe nurse.
Okay.
So neither one of them got what they wanted in life. But after
They
my,
were living lives of quiet desperation.
they were sort of, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, my dad was playing the piano my whole life.
Hmm.
Neither one of them sang, but we all sang. We sang
Hmm.
in church, we sang in school, yeah. Choir, 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 choir all the time.
Yeah.
Uh, I fell in love with singing in choir and making sounds in an ensemble and all of that. And really, theater came later for me.
Hmm.
Music came first. Uh,
Right.
so no, I mean, then later when my dad retired, he became full-time musician. He started playing the trombone, playing the piano, and joining bands,
That's wonderful.
in his 70s and 80s. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow, that's amazing. So, were you thinking at any point you wanted to be like a solo artist, or were you thinking that you wanted to be part of a choir, or what was your desire?
Yeah, I loved ensemble singing more than I loved solo singing.
Hmm.
I set about to become a choir director. That
Hmm.
was so I'd say that my first goal was I want to direct choirs. I want to have this beautiful, lush 8-part choir that I can direct. So I
Hmm.
did that, for 7 years. I taught junior and senior high music. And um, at first, you're so disappointed with, oh, they can't make the sound that I have in my ears. Oh, well, okay. Um,
Right.
because they're in junior and senior high.
Yeah.
But I enjoyed that, and I started doing theater at that point. So while I was directing choirs, I started doing community theater all the time at night and all summer.
And so, what drove you to that? Was it did you what was your first production?
Well, I loved musicals.
Mm.
So when I was in high school, the high school always did these big, splashy musicals.
Mm.
Um, and I emotionally fell in love with not only choral singing, but just being in musicals and musical theater. And I memorized all the lyrics and the songs to Camelot, My
Mm.
Fair Lady, The Music Man, Carousel, all of those.
Right.
And I used to sing my sister to sleep every night with the score,
Aw.
the score of something. She'd get the whole score of something.
Did
Uh,
she enjoy it?
no, she did. Who knows, right?
Right. Right.
I also read to her The Catcher in the Rye. I love The Catcher in the Rye.
Really?
Yeah. I was like 15 and she was about 10. And I said, Linda, you need to hear this. You need to hear this Catcher in the Rye. I'm going to read it to you. Um, she acted like she liked it.
Mm.
Yeah. My brother
Well,
and I would sing together. He's a singer too. Um, so he and I memorized, the Music Man, the dialogue between the lead woman and her mother. There's this dialogue in there.
what song though?
It's called, well, it goes, Mama, a man with a suitcase has been following me all over town. Oh, who? I never saw him before. Did he say anything? He tried. Did you say anything? No, Mama, of course not. Right. So that dialogue, my brother and I memorized that dialogue and we would speak it to each other every night.
Aw.
And then we would sing all the rest of the songs from the Music Man.
Wow. So, what was your favorite music of all time that you like go back to and think about often?
My favorite music or musical?
Musical.
Musical. Music Man is pretty close.
Hmm.
Um,
Light a Rose.
yeah, I love the Music Man.
Yeah.
I'll never not love the Music Man because it was the first musical I ever saw as a movie.
Hmm.
And that's when I fell in love with it. I was 10 and my parents said, "We're going to take you to a musical."
You probably sang "Good Night, My Someone" to your sister, right?
I did.
Yeah,
But I
it's a
also
beautiful
sang
one.
76 trombones and, trouble, my friends. You got trouble right here in River City. Sure, I'm a billion player. Mighty proud to say, always mighty proud to say it. Right. So I did that too.
Well, did you do that for trying to get her to go to sleep? That probably kind of wound her up a little bit,
I
right?
don't think I was trying to get her to go to sleep. No.
Oh, okay, okay. Well, that's wonderful. So how did you like make the transition into acting? Was it like, I mean, what made you pursue that as opposed to staying within music?
Well, so when I taught music for 7 years at the junior and senior high in Southern Ohio,
Mm-hmm.
and there came a time when, you're looking at the salary schedule and you're seeing that unless you get more education, you're going to stay in this one aisle of salary. You're never gonna get the higher salaries if you don't get more education.
Yeah.
So I thought, well, okay, clearly I have to get a master's degree in order to earn more money, or I'm going to stay in this same thing
Mm-hmm.
my whole teaching life. And I also started getting an itch to broaden my mind.
Mm-hmm.
I was teaching junior and senior high, and I loved them, and I loved all the students. I loved all my colleagues, and I felt like I had no intellectual stimulation whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought I need to get an MA, or an or a master's in music. I didn't trust that I could get a master's in music. It was I thought it would be too demanding. So I decided to get a master's in theater instead. I decided that would be less demanding, strangely enough, even though
Right.
I didn't even have a degree in theater.
Right.
So I went to Bowling Green State University to get a master's, an MA
Mm-hmm.
in theater. And so I was acting that whole time. And then I went back and did another year at the junior high, taught again. And then one of the teachers from Bowling Green said, I'll give you a grant, an assistantship, if you'll come down to the University of South Carolina and get an MFA for free.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, oh, wow, 3
Yeah.
years. Oh, it was 2 years actually. 2 years just acting and being paid for it
Mm-hmm.
in South Carolina? Sounds great.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the transition came from community theater to the itch for intellectual stimulation and something new, and then going down and then while I was working on an MFA at University of South Carolina, I thought, now these folks that are teaching me acting, voice, and movement, I think I could do that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's when the turning point came in terms of the career, from going from teaching public school to teaching university.
Now, was there a production like something that made you really go, oh, I enjoy acting. This is different, and
Wow. I was exclusively in musicals in community theater until I was in the Glass Menagerie.
Mhm.
When I played Laura in the Glass Menagerie, I suddenly recognized that I could be an actor.
Mhm.
And even though when I would go to rehearsals with no singing, I did miss it. But the journey of Laura, the Glass Menagerie is still my favorite play.
Mm.
And that's interesting, isn't it? Really,
Yeah.
because I've coached that play 3 times in terms of
Mhm.
accents, and I've been in it once. And I still have a real heart connection with the whole play.
How so? What was it? The intellectual stimulation from
Part of it was that. Part of it was Tennessee Williams is brilliant.
Mhm.
So the every time even after I'd been in it and I was coaching it, the poeticism and the brilliance of the text. It was kind of like when you fall in love with Shakespeare for the first time, you recognize that this perfect expression of 4 characters in a family that had this joyous and sad and mournful and longing, and everything was in that play. And playing Laura was the first time I ever played someone who was deeply vulnerable. Not that Fiona in Brigadoon isn't deeply vulnerable, but she gets to sing all kinds of great songs which take you in a different direction,
Mhm.
Laura is crippled and crippled sort of emotionally, and her mother and her have this codependent kind of bond. And depending on, now that I've coached it and been in it, you can tell the Glass Menagerie from the point of view of any one of the characters. Mm-hmm. And the last one I coached, Amanda, the woman who played Amanda, Susan Clark, was incredibly vulnerable as Amanda, and not just funny. She wasn't just funny. She was heartbreaking. Her perspective on it was so heartbreaking that I remember sitting in the audience, and I can even feel it now, Brian. I felt like I was uncontrollably choking up when she was playing Amanda. Mm. And that's because of the depth of, that moment right at the end when Amanda and Laura are looking at the sliver of the moon, and the depths of both of their losses and the connection through each other of the sharing of a loss that, well, they both shared the loss and they were both inextricably not connected. So there was connection, but not connection. Mm-hmm. A sort of loss of loss of connection to self and connection to other. It really made Tom's point of view, which is that he's looking back at this experience because it's, his story. Mm-hmm. He's looking back at this experience saying, I need to tell this story. I need to tell this story about my mother and my sister. And it won't go away, and it keeps coming up, and I need to get it out. Mm. And if those two parts are played like that, then you really see what happened to Tom. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the complexity of our shared human experience is illustrated through that for sure. Yeah. Mm-hmm. That is beautiful. And so you definitely seems like you carried that throughout your life, that experience, and it has informed your work.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. And I think the next, I think after I started teaching voice and speech, and at the first, I taught at CalArts, I taught speech, but that was 7 years of my life. So 7 years of my life, I taught speech exclusively. The rest of my entire career, I mostly taught Linklater voice. Mm-hmm. So after grad school, well, my teacher in grad school had studied with Kristin Linklater. So I always had this kind of draw toward, she studied with Kristin Linklater. Maybe there's a chance later for me to study with Kristin Linklater. So I started teaching voice without having contacted Kristin, but I found out later that the teacher that I did have at South Carolina was actually really accurate in the work. So I wasn't led astray. Mm-hmm. And then when I came to study with Kristin, supported by grants from Northern Illinois University, I had then a 3-year, very, very deep, intensive 3 years of going to month-long intensives and studying privately and following a teacher around, and then going to study with Kristin for the final designation. So that, I'd say that the whole Shakespeare and Company and Kristin, that was the next sort of big influence in where my career went.
Well, I want to talk about that. Before I do that, I did not remember to ask you, is my headroom okay? Do I have too much or too little?
Headroom? For
Yeah.
you? Good.
Is
Oh,
this all
yeah.
right?
Yep. You're perfectly framed.
All right, great. So can you explain a little bit about Kristin Linklater and that method?
Um, Kristin came to the United States at a time when there was a sort of a hole in voice training, in that the voice training at that time was more like elocution. And so she came at the time when Stanislavski, Uta Hagen, um, Stella Adler, uh, the method was being
Hmm.
taught here. So there was an emotional center of, based on what people understood was Stanislavski at the time,
Hmm.
going on here. And elocution didn't really facilitate actors getting in touch with self and getting in touch with their own breath and their own life force. So when Kristin came, she was given a grant. I think, I know I'm supposed to know this history backwards and forwards, but I don't. I think it was Fulbright, but I can't recall. She
Hmm.
was given a grant to train a whole little cadre of teachers who all got to do it for free.
I see.
Uh, and then they went off to various places, the Guthrie and etc. So her work started getting sort of spread around. And then she co-founded Shakespeare and Company with Tina Packer.
Hmm.
And that must have been around 1970. And so then Kristin had a kind of an artistic home, and
Hmm.
that's where teachers were trained after that. But the first group of teachers were not aligned with Shakespeare and Company. But when I came in 1989, 88, 89, those were Kristin's last 3 years with Shakespeare and Company.
Hmm. And how was that experience working with her?
It was mostly thrilling, life-changing,
Hmm.
um, upheaving, um, uh, and there was also, it was also challenging. It was also difficult, um, because Kristin herself had a uh, critical streak, that didn't align well with my own personal sensibilities.
Hmm.
And but I submitted to her anyway, and then only later began to think, I don't think I want to completely submit here. I don't think submission is necessarily the best way here.
Hmm.
I started to get my own power back. But when I first started studying with her, I felt like my own personal power got sort of challenged, and I was sort of battered around a bit. Um, I found an awful lot. It formed the basis of my teaching, and I also had to get my footing back, get my own personal anchor back after being sort of unearthed by the work.
Now, how do you feel it changed your life?
Well, from that moment on, at least professionally, all of the positions that I got after that were based on the fact that I was a designated Linklater teacher.
Hmm.
Um, but it also connected me to a whole network of Linklater teachers.
Hmm.
And even though I had been already a member of the Voice and Speech Trainers Association, VASTA,
Hmm.
and that VASTA actually changed my life too, because that was a professional international organization where I had support and colleagues and people to call and talk to about voice. The Linklater community was that also, but in a more narrow way, in terms of uh, everyone in the Linklater community espouses a similar ideology, a similar approach to how you train actors' voices.
Hmm.
And so, what it gave me is that, let's say I was teaching a class on releasing the jaw. And I'd think, oh God, I can't get half the class to release their jaw. What's going on? And I would call up a friend of mine who I'd studied with in my Linklater training, and I'd say, Judy, I'm on jaw right now. And she'd go, oh yeah, I'm on jaw right now too. Oh, what do we do? Okay, so you got to really remember to let them to release the back of the, oh yeah, release the back of the neck. Right. So are they stopping breathing when they're shaking? Yeah, they all stop breathing. Okay, so what do you do when so we'd have conversations with each other about you know, problem solving and support and oh yeah, it's really difficult to do that. Oh, so and so has such a tight tongue. Yeah, what do you do about that? Oh, but
You were on Jaw Patrol.
I was on jaw patrol, tongue patrol. Yeah, I mean, the cool thing about being at CalArts is that, Fran was on Jaw Patrol, and
Yeah.
I could just say, see, you seem to have a tight jaw. Remember what you did with Fran this morning. Okay? Or, that vowel actually requires a little release in your jaw. Could you manage that? And I didn't have to teach it, right?
Right.
So I was always sort of bouncing between Fran and Irene about, well, didn't Irene already teach you about the sweep of the text?
Mhm.
Sweep of the text, right? So you're running across the room, and I would refer. It was cool to be able to do that, Brian. It was cool to be able to say, I'm not the only voice and speech teacher here. I can bounce among these other two people, and I have a lane and I have a very clear lane here. It's all about speech sounds and dialects and, analysis of one's own speech and feeling of vibration in the pillows.
Yeah, you, Fran, and Irene were like the holy trinity of voice and speech because, I mean, having, one class after another really was beneficial because you all had different ways of going about different things. And, I've been revisiting because, as you're aware, Fran passed away, and I've been thinking a lot. And right before she passed away, I had this realization that, I have a lot of anxiety and tension because of being blind and adapting and all that. And I noticed that when I'm super anxious or experiencing like this OCD type thing, it's because I'm not breathing.
Yeah. Oh,
And
I can tell you, even though what I say to people is I teach this shit. Even though I teach this shit, um, when I'm having anxiety, I remind myself of the same thing, Brian.
yeah,
I think release your belly, align down into your sits bones, put your head and neck over your shoulder. Right?
yeah.
I do the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I'm so glad we're having this conversation because I've just started. I mean, it's been really 20 years since I performed consistently, and I just started doing stand-up comedy. And
Wow.
I'm going back to doing the undulations, releasing the jaw and doing all that because I remember how important it was to being free and open, and it helps so much.
Yeah, and what you forget, and even I forget this, is that it also gives you access to your creativity. I mean, it's
Yeah.
not just physical. I'm thinking about, oh my God, I'm so in awe of you doing stand up because that just seems like a whole nother level. And I don't know how you would access your inner juices as a stand-up storyteller comedian without breathing down into the depths of you. It would all
Yeah.
be very shallow without it.
Oh yeah, I mean, before I did it, and I've only done it, I haven't. I started doing it recently, and what I've done is I did all the undulations. I did the drop it to come back with the leg, and I did release the jaw, and I'm trying to remember all of those exercises and bring them back because they're so critical to doing exactly what you said, which is getting to the creativity in the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm deeply grateful for all of the gifts that you and Fran and Irene gave me because, and I think everybody in our class does. I mean, I know I just had a conversation with Aaron Shiver. We were just talking about he still does all those exercises, you know.
Wow. Well, you guys, so who are the other people in your class? Remind me of your.
Sarah Louise Wilson. And we talked about that as well. She's still doing it. She's stretching and doing all of that. And so it was Sarah Louise Wilson, Matt Bittman,
Yep.
who we became really close. John Sanders, I'm trying to think. Meryl Davis, she was
Oh
Beth
yeah.
before that. And Lindsay Griffin, Whitson Hannah, Jessica Kendall. Who else? There's more, but yeah, I mean, those are
Who
some.
was who was Witt's? Witt had a sort of a
He was
side.
from Oklahoma.
He was yes. He and who was the other actor? I remember some scene they did together, so I know two.
Oh, by the way, Robert Thomas,
Yes.
who died tragically a few years ago. You paired him with me to do so we had to
Her
base
accent project.
yeah,
Yes. Yes.
yeah,
Wow.
and I think about that a lot because actually through that project we became close because we had to talk to each other and really listen deeply to each other so that we could learn our speech patterns. And
Yeah.
yeah, so I mean, if it had not been for that, I don't think that we would have had, I mean, that really, it really connected us. And when I found out that he died, I was just, it was horrible. It's just but you are aware of that, right?
I do remember that.
Yeah.
That I remember hearing about it, what, 2, 3 years ago?
Yeah, I think it was 2017, if I remember correctly. Yeah. 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 It was very, very tragic. Um, but so where did you go after you left Shakespeare and Company?
Well, during Shakespeare and Company, I was working for Northern Illinois University, and then I went to SMU for a couple of years.
Hmm.
And it was awful. Um, and then I came to CalArts.
Now, I mean, you mentioned a little bit about your experience at CalArts, but I also want to ask, we'll get into CalArts, but what was some of your most memorable speech coaching moments with actors that you really think about often?
Um, because I've had 20 years here, probably a lot of them I remember here more,
Hmm.
Paul. Speech coaching wise, I remember pairing all of you up at CalArts with the Personal Partner Accent Project.
Hmm.
Um, I remember how game everyone was, and how the CalArts was, to me, CalArts was the place where I felt the most. It's some of the best teaching years of my life were at CalArts.
Hmm.
And why was that? Um,
What years were you there, by the way?
yeah, 94 to 2001.
Okay. So
And
and that's what I remember. You left when we graduated, the
yeah,
year we graduated. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And it was, I didn't really want to leave. I don't know if you
Mm.
know any of that. But the political part of it was untenable.
Mm.
Um, and I found a really great home in Chicago. I didn't really want to leave CalArts because the thing that I love, the students at CalArts were some of my best students I've ever had.
Hmm.
Um, and some
What?
of it was the eagerness, the gameness, the eagerness, the freedom, the hunger. Um, CalArts did not have, even though I know that we could have had you guys fill out teaching evaluations, I know we could have. I never did.
Hmm.
Um, but I always felt like the students and teachers had enough of a dialogue among us that I didn't feel like there didn't need to seem to need to be a barrier.
Hmm.
I don't know what it was like for you as a student, but I remember thinking that that the I remember feeling more like colleagues with my students at CalArts.
Mm.
Like, and some of it, you know, if you have, as soon as you have grades, as soon as you're giving people A's and A minuses and B pluses, and I know CalArts had, you know, what do they call it? High pass and low
High
pass.
pass, low pass. Yeah.
You know, which, you know, it's in some ways turned into grades, but I didn't feel like the students were so grade conscious as they have been at places where I've had to distinguish between an A minus and a B plus.
Yeah, it was really about the work. I mean, and improving and you know, I think about that, and that experience, not only was it so beautiful because we felt like a family, and you're right about the colleague thing. I mean, I didn't feel like there was a hierarchy. I felt like there was, you know, we had mutual respect, and you know, you called us out on our bullshit, and we appreciated it because it only made us better.
And I don't remember being afraid to call you out on your bullshit.
Right.
You know, when you again, as soon as you put a barrier up, as soon as you have grades and teaching evaluations and everything, and as soon as you have hierarchy, now it's about, well, you know, is so and so going to get offended if I tell him that he needs to breathe?
Yeah.
And so I remember feeling quite free about how I taught at CalArts. And I also, you know, I was developing a whole new program, Brian. I had never taught just exclusively speech before. I was developing that. You know, every year I'd think, I'm going to try something new. This year I'm going to assign a dialect project, and everyone's going to go out and find someone to interview, and then they're going to tape them. They're going to bring them back. Then they're going to teach everybody that accent. And I know I used that for years after that, but the place I first developed it was at CalArts.
You know, the other thing about it is you helped me like embody things in a way that I don't think I experienced anywhere else. And what I mean by that is there are things that we did in that class, like we did the Irish accent, and I remember you played some kind of, like, it was like this tape. It was a song. It was like, if I were king of Ireland, I'd find my way back to old Martha in Galway Bay. I remember that. Like, there's no way I would remember that. And then I remember doing the dialect. I remember meeting with this gentleman who was from France. His name was Michel. He worked at Lichen. I remember all that. Like I didn't do the accent very well right there, but I do remember it. You know what I mean? But yeah, those memories are so vivid still.
Yeah, yeah. Well, now that, you know, as you're bringing them up, my memories of a lot of that are vivid as well.
Yeah.
And partially because I was inventing all the time.
Yeah.
And I felt free to, Brian. You know, I felt like, I felt as though I could listen to what my students were working on and what they were interested in. And then I could search my inner Rolodex of potential projects and exercises, and how about we try this? And again, the thing about CalArts students is people would go, yeah, let's do that. I remember a day when I had been studying with, you know, Pat Fraley. Do you remember him at all?
No, I'm sorry, I don't.
Pat Fraley is a vocal characterization expert. He has always done cartoon voice, and he also.
Oh yeah. Did he? Yes, you brought him in, right?
Did, yeah.
Yeah, and he did the voices for like G.I. Joe and.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah, because he taught us how to do this.
Yes, he did.
Yeah, my wife hates it when I do that, but yeah.
Oh my God, yeah. Well, and Pat has expanded his teaching now. I mean, he teaches, and he does a lot of, like I said, audiobooks and 100 best tricks ever to come out of Hollywood, and all, you know, all kinds of things that he teaches now. But back then, I had been taking a class from him in Los Angeles at the time that I was teaching at CalArts.
Mm-hmm.
So I would bring his work into the class too. And I remember like standing in a circle. I remember one time doing with you guys, the parents, and you each had to go into the center of the circle and do each one of your parents.
Mm.
Right. So, and I remember that Bridget Connors, I don't know if you remember her, Bridget Connors, she went into the center of the circle and did her mom, Irene.
Mm-hmm.
And that was fun.
Right.
But that everybody really, again, just the gameness about it. Yes, I'm going to go into the middle of this circle and I'm going to portray my mother. Yes, I'm going to go into the middle of that circle and I'm going to put on my father's voice. And right, so the degree of inventiveness, the places people were willing to go.
Mm-hmm.
When students are willing to go places, as a teacher, you feel like you come up with 100 more, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
If you'll try this, then I'm like, oh, and how about that?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and how about this? Try this now.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So that degree of personal inventiveness as a teacher, I think that part of me grew at CalArts, partially because of what the students were like.
Do you recall when Jessica Kendall, we were working on Shakespeare,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it was around the time we did Mara Assad in Lou's class,
Mm.
Lou Coulter. And I remember Jessica was doing this thing where she was saying chopping block. Yeah. And she'd go, chopping block. And it was like, it was really intense because, I mean, Jessica's pretty intense anyway, but like, yeah. But I remember she was doing the IPA and how it was affecting her was really powerful. And just that one phrase, do you remember that?
Because we were doing the vowel scale.
Yeah.
Right. So we were doing zoo, zh, whoa, shaw. So that's why it was chopping block, chopping block.
Yeah.
Well, that's, again, that is where I developed further the exercise that I learned from Kristin, which was the vowel ladder or the vowel scale. I got to develop that in all kinds of different ways with text with you guys.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean that was really helpful. I mean, especially with Shakespeare, like to really, I mean, it made it like the words were flowing through us and they were like resonating through our body. And that.
Well, and I had enough time to do that at CalArts because I was only teaching speech. So
yeah,
we did the entire sound and movement sequence, which you might not remember. It starts out with mouths and then it goes to colors, and then your arms and your legs are different colors. And then you do the primitive articulation where you use parts of your body and parts of other people's bodies to articulate with. And then you do the planet of certain sounds and the planet of certain other sounds. And then you do the vowel scale, and then you start to put that into Shakespeare. And by then you're moving, sound is moving through your body. And suddenly speaking takes on a visceral component.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It did. Would you consider Kristin Linklater a mentor, or did you have other mentors that you identified with?
Kristin Linklater was one of my main mentors. And I also had Frankie Armstrong, who is a singer, and she does this work called Acting and Singing with Archetypes. And so I became sort of certified to do that as well. And so that work about how you explore the voice and how you explore yourself and your acting through taking on, let's say, the crone or the hero or the Lucifer, that was also very creative. And I didn't start really doing that intensively until I left CalArts. Because I was teaching speech at CalArts. So that wouldn't have been a logical place for me to put it. So Frankie, Richard Armstrong, who taught the Roy Hart work. Do you know the Roy Hart work? CalArts had Roy Hart work after I left. But it is about exploring the voice by looking into all the nooks and crannies of how where the voice is coming from in your body and the imagery that's happening, and exploring your entire vocal range in terms of pitch and texture and wildness and all of that. So I started doing that with Richard Armstrong, and that changed me yet again. That was another life-changing experience, where I've discovered that my own voice had many more colors than I ever thought it did. And therefore, if my voice had more colors than I thought it did, so did my students.
Right.
So I started doing some of what they call the piano work with the Roy Hart work with students in my voice classes.
Can you give an example of what you're talking about?
Oh, sure. So in the Roy Hart work there, or in Richard's version of it, there's an exercise where you visit a particular kind of creature, and you develop a kind of a sound that's connected with that creature in your body. So it takes over an entire part of you physically. So there's this hungry little with a long nose and pointy fingers, and this character is a little character, right? So you explore that character, and then you explore the Countess, who is sitting and waiting for someone to come into the room. And when someone enters the room, she says hello from that place in herself. And then so there's 4 characters. They develop individually, and then you transition over to thinking about the instruments of violin, viola, cello, and double bass. So then you start to, on one pitch, explore violin, viola, cello, double bass. Violin, viola, cello, double bass. So you start to discover all that and take that throughout your range. And you can see how that might take people in places that they hadn't gone before. It's also an amazing warm-up. But it's creative, it stimulates the imagination in the same way, really, that Kristin's sound and movement and the vowel scale and all that stimulates the imagination. So even outside of text, even before you even get to text, your imagination is already telling a story through the voice. That's what I learned from Richard and the Roy Hart work, is how the voice will tell a story before you even have a word. And I don't think that I truly got that concept in such an expansive way until the Roy Hart work.
I see. Yeah, that's intense. That seems very intense. So then you moved on to DePaul. How was that experience?
Well, originally I felt like I was ripped away from California.
Yeah.
And came to Chicago and hated it.
Oh, really?
Oh God. I lived in Valencia. I lived at a resort in Valencia, right? With palm trees and swimming pools. And I taught up the hill, and it was, CalArts has its own mystique and, oh my God, just the arts, and there's just something so wonderful about it. And then I came to DePaul, where it was a university, and it was cold, and there were too many buildings and too much noise. And I told myself that I only had to stay a year. I don't have to stay any longer than that. And then, I started to find some depth in DePaul's the theater school, a different kind of depth than I found in CalArts, really. There was more, we had more collaboration in terms of determining the direction of the school. It was more democratic. You know, when you work within a university, there are rules about that kind of thing. I mean, you can't just hire somebody you feel like hiring.
Yeah.
There has to be a search, and it has to have this many people on it, and and you have to treat the applications in this way. And so while that was limiting in one way, it was also a relief in other ways, because I felt like I had a voice just like anybody else. And the acting program here, and the voice program, and the movement program were all very strong. So I didn't feel like I was going to an immensely strong program into a weak program. I felt like I was going from an immensely strong program into an immensely strong program.
Yeah.
Just a different program. And I also got to teach voice here, which was a little bit of a relief after 7 years of not being able to teach any Linklater. That answer your question? Would you just ask?
Yeah. Well, I'm. What was it like returning back to just voice?
Well, I got to teach speech here too. So I brought everything I had ever done at CalArts and taught it here, albeit in a more abbreviated way. Because, you know, at CalArts, we had 2 years of exclusively speech. I mean, believe me, you wouldn't believe how many times I'd said in my DePaul meetings, you know, if we could offer 2 solid years of speech alongside 2 solid years of voice, that would be just amazing. No, that's not going to happen. Okay. Yeah. So that was an unusual experience, but because I had developed all that at CalArts, I certainly had a lot of flexibility. I came back here, we had pillows here. But you know, the coming back to the Linklater progression, which is a kind of a real, a home, feels like a home, you know, like you were mentioning some of the exercises that you still do. There is a feeling of coming back home with those exercises. Yeah. And there's a logical, anatomical, psychophysical progression that begins with the body and goes to the breath, and then goes to the vibrations, and then goes to the magnifying of vibrations, and then goes to the lips, and then the neck, and then the body, and then the jaw, tongue, and soft palate, and then the resonators, and then the extra breath, and then onto the articulation and the upper resonators. And, you know, all of that became mine to teach.
It all just came back right there when you did all that.
Yeah. Well, and I had been teaching privately the whole time, so it's not like I ever lost it, but it was a kind of a coming home to be able to do it in depth with groups of students. So
what was your relationship like with Fran Bennett? Now, I mean, I'd like to bring it up just because we lost her recently.
It was rocky. She was my mentor. And while she was my mentor, it had its positive aspects. I certainly learned a lot from her. I didn't find her especially comforting or supportive, but she knew things. She knew some exercises and some approaches. Some of the ones you were talking about the swings,
drop it to come back,
the drop it to come back, and the drop it to go with the neck, and some specific channel exercises. I got those specifically from Fran. Didn't get them from Kristin. Taught them later to my Linklater colleagues. Said, Fran does this. You know, nobody else does this. And you know, she and I were close enough as mentor and student, although again, it wasn't a cozy feeling. I thought we were friends at that point. And then she hired me because I did the pillows, and because she wanted to shift CalArts over to that perspective on speech training, and she wanted to hire either Louis Colaianni or me. And Louis was not available, so she took me. And for a long time at CalArts, I felt very supported by her. And then when Susan came, a lot of things shifted. And I felt like I lost Fran's support completely. And she became an enemy. And, it was for a long time, it was a source of great sadness for me, loss, confusion. But then, over the years, after I left CalArts I left CalArts because Susan and Fran were no longer supporting me. They said they liked my teaching, but they started being just kind of mean people. They were mean. And I didn't know what to do with that. So I found another job and left. And then after a while, I would still see Fran at Vasta. I would still see Fran at the Linklater things. And we sort of seemed like we had sort of this uneasy sort of keeping distant relationship of stasis. And even worked together a couple of times. But it never was close again.
Are you in contact with Craig Belknap and Lou Poulter?
Craig Belknap and I were exchanging Christmas cards for a long time. And every once in a while we, write little, oh, Craig, oh, Claudia. And on Facebook, of course, you say, happy birthday, Lou.
Yeah.
But, and I would love to go to Italy and just be in Craig's acting class, or come to LA and take his writing class. I'm very aware of him as a creative spirit and just a wonderful colleague. But it's been a long time.
Yeah. Yeah. So what are your plans now? What are you working on?
Well, interestingly, when I retired, I didn't know if I wanted to continue to teach in any function. Because I've always been interested in music, I knew I wanted that to be a larger part of my life than it could be when I was teaching theater. And when the pandemic hit, before the pandemic hit, I was trying to find, where was I gonna find my community? So I started doing things like going to the gym a lot and volunteering at the Old Town School of Folk Music, where I had been taking lessons and doing things for years. Chicago has this amazing thing called the Old Town School of Folk Music. It is hands down the best folk music community, music school and community in the nation. So the part of me that was so glad to have landed in Chicago, where the Old Town School of Folk Music was, decided that I was going to spend a lot of time there. So I picked up on my guitar and my drumming and my songwriting and all of that. So I was doing all of that, and then the pandemic hit, and I live all by myself. And so I was like, oh boy, okay. Now we're not going to the gym. We're not going to the Old Town School of Folk Music. But during the pandemic, suddenly everything was on Zoom. Suddenly there were singing circles from Ireland, England, Scotland, Australia, Portland. So I joined all kinds of singing circles. So what has kept me busy and been such a opportunity is being able to learn a couple of traditional songs per week to sing at 2 or 3 sessions per week.
Oh,
and that, I feel like I found my people.
Yeah. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
Great.
The internet is bringing people together as it was intended to.
It was. And, and some of these things are not going away. Now, one of the singing circles that I loved for a year and a half, they were every Friday night on Zoom. Well, every Friday night for them, 3 o'clock in the afternoon for me. And they have since gone back to being live.
Mhm.
So more power to them. So glad for them. But that means I don't get to see them. But there's one from Belfast that I go to on Thursdays, and there's one out of Portland that I go to on Saturdays. And then Frankie Armstrong has a music sharing on Tuesdays once a month. And then I have an Irish music class where I play the tin whistle every Wednesday night, and I take guitar lessons, and I take tin whistle lessons. So I feel like I'm suddenly a full-time musician, which is fantastic.
Would you be willing to share a song with us?
Oh, sure.
If you, I want you to feel comfortable. So if you're,
Sure, yeah.
Yeah.
Let me do one I did a couple days ago. All right, I'm gonna do. Let's see. This one was written by a woman in my song circle.
Okay.
This is called Farewell to the Strawberry Tree. Thomas is away across the rolling main. He will taste the briny deep for many a long day. He has stroked the holy ground where his mother lies beneath, and parted from his love under a sky replete with rain. Farewell to the strawberry tree and the purple butterfly, which fluttered in the secret places known to you and I, and danced above our craning heads so lively and so high, on the day we bade her, Thomas, a most sorrowful goodbye. He whittled and he carved to please her with his token, a heart of bogwood oak to fold into her linen. And he has pledged most sacred words, never to be broken, even in the twilight years when promises are dimming. Farewell to the strawberry tree and the purple butterfly, which fluttered in the secret places known to you and I, and danced above our craning heads so lively and so high, on the day she bade her Thomas a most sorrowful goodbye. The paths whereon they walked are choked with slippery moss. She has set a forest fire of his hard and wooden heart, and flung the cold and powdery ash into the raging of the wind, where the particles of her and him forever drift apart. Farewell to the strawberry tree and the purple butterfly, which fluttered in the secret places known to you and I, and danced above our craning heads so lively and so high, on the day she bade her Thomas a most sorrowful goodbye. And on foreign soil he will betray her in the blinking of an eye.
That was beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that.
You're welcome.
Really lovely. Well, I want to thank you so much. This has really been a wonderful experience, and I'm going to ask you a couple questions before we close out. But I've been starting to ask this, but if you could say something to everyone on Earth simultaneously at the same time, as if you had an omnipotent voice, what would you say?
Oh, omnipotent voice. Well, Beatles songs are coming into my head. All you need is love. Dun, da, 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 dun.
That'll work.
Yeah, okay.
That's great. Yeah.
I was thinking about death and life and how both are part of the same thing, and we don't need to fear death. And I'm still trying to convince myself of that. Yeah.
What, speaking of death, what would your epitaphs say?
She finally discovered that she didn't have to accomplish anything to be human.
Well, I will say this. What you did at CalArts for myself and others, I feel like you gave us a great gift. You gave us the gift of exploring our voice and understanding who we are as performers and as human beings. Oh, not, I don't know, that's odd.
Siri is talking to you.
Yeah, that was John Mulaney. I don't know why that came on. Anyway, so yeah, I mean, you gave us wonderful gifts and of how to embody words and make it flow through your soul. And I really think you know, I carry with that all those things that you gave us. You know, I still carry those. I mean, and now that I'm performing again after 20 years, it's all you know, critical to what I'm doing right now, and it's necessary because you know, being blind has put a lot of tension in my body, and I have to get rid of that tension and shake off the rust. And I appreciate all the tools that you've given us.
Yeah, I mean, I'm my hat's off to you to keep exploring, that you're keeping exploring, remembering, investing in your own creativity while experiencing such a change in your life. I mean, the only thing I have that's even close is that I'm dealing with aging, and you know, what does that mean? And what it means is that to keep going back and investing in breathing and senses and communication and relationships. Yeah. Thank you, Brian. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anything you want to say to the CalArts class, acting class of 2001?
God, I loved them so much. I'm so, you know,
I didn't mention everybody, and everybody's probably going to get upset, but
well, I got to tell you, the sole reason I joined Facebook back when I was trying to decide whether to do it, it is to connect with my former CalArts students.
Yeah.
Because everyone else around me was going, I remember so and so from 1985, and they were in my class, and I'm like, my former beautiful students are in California and other places. They're just not here. So that's why I joined Facebook. Because Facebook is a mixed bag.
Yes, it is a mix. Yeah, it is. Well, thank you so much for sharing what is alive within you. And I was an honor and a pleasure to have this conversation. I deeply appreciate it. And please stay healthy and safe. And so if you're listening on YouTube, or excuse me, what are you listening on? Apple Podcasts and watching on YouTube, thank you so much. Please rate, subscribe, and review. And if you like my wife and I being exhausting, check us out on TikTok, The Exhausting Sniders. And thank you, Claudia Anderson. Deeply appreciate everything that you've given us. And thank you.
Thank you.
All right, now we're going to have our awkward ending. Here we go.